Hello and welcome to The Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. Whereas of course we all appreciate the fact that child abuse or child maltreatment is something which of course exists all over the world. We would also appreciate the fact that it is something which is more rampant, it is something which is more common in the developing parts of the world. How have child abuse and child maltreatment trends evolved in the Pakistani society over a period of time? This is something that we'll be discussing during the course of today's conversation. We'll also be talking about the various laws and policies that we do have in place so as to address the social menace of child abuse. We'll be talking about the typical societal attitudes that we do have, which unfortunately stigmatize those who've been subjected to the same, to talk about it openly. And in this regard, we'll also be shedding light on the very pivotal, rather the very important responsibility which then lies on both the parents as well as the educational institutions, so as to ensure that children, whenever they do report of such instances, they are given that encouragement, they are given that of course kind of support to talk about such issues openly. And in this regard, we'll also be talking about the work of the various stakeholders and of course the need for media to very openly talk about such issues so as to raise maximum community awareness on the same. This and much more to follow on today's show, and to do that, let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Dr. Naeem Zafar Saab, who is a senior pediatrician. He's also a child's rights expert. Assalamu alaikum ji, welcome to the show. My second panelist for the show today is Dr. Mariam Haider. She's a psychologist and she's an educationist as well. Assalamu alaikum madam and welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
My third panelist for the show today is Barrister Amrat Ahmed. She's a lawyer and she's also a social worker. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. And via Zoom link, we'll be joined by Ms. Afsha Tehseen. She's the chairperson on the National Commission on the Rights of Child. Assalamu alaikum madam and welcome to the show.
Walaikum assalam and hi everybody.
Well, to get the conversation started with you, sir, at a very basic level, whenever we talk about child abuse, I think the first thing that comes to anybody's mind is the fact that, it is just physical abuse per se. So for the clarification of the audience, given of course the fact that, this word in itself has an international definition attached to it too, how then do we interpret child abuse as it does exist in the Pakistani society?
So when we talk of child abuse and neglect, the physical abuse is probably, yes, as you said, is the most visible and the one that we talk about most. But also the neglect is the most common. Whenever we take the statistics, something around 60 to 70% the world over is neglect. Even in our hospital cases that we see about 70% of neglect cases. And why not? Because and there are also emotional trauma and sexual abuse. These are the four areas. But why not? You see, when a baby is born or even not born, that is the time when we stop taking care of him.
Right.
The state, the society and the others, we are not actively seeking the child to be an active member of the society right from the start. So before birth, the mother is treated badly, the nutrition is not there. Then after birth, breastfeeding is not provided.
Right.
Ample opportunities for the child to learn are not provided. And then we know that the brain connections continues on for life, but the structure finishes something around 1.5 to 2 years. And the hardwiring occurs at that time. And because of that, it is ingrained in the brain that some forms of child abuse, which are probably like corporal punishment, if you talk,
sir.
Whenever I talk about corporal punishment in larger forums even, people tend to accept it as norm.
Right, sir, your point is noted. I think to get the basics straight, it's very important to, of course, clarify at the outset that whenever we talk about child abuse, it just doesn't, of course, cover, physical abuse or sexual abuse. It also covers, neglect. Madam, coming towards you, I think we must also explore the psychological impact of this whole debate. So when we talk about, of course, the kind of impact child abuse or for that matter neglect does have on any child, what are the most pressing impacts that you do see on children?
Unfortunately, the impact of child abuse and child neglect is long lasting. And it sort of starts from the way they perceive relationships, the way they perceive the world around them. And then it is like a vicious cycle. So they grow up to be adults who then again promote the same kind of behavior.
Right.
Because if you haven't had a nurturing, warm, loving environment as a child, you don't know how to create that environment. And sometimes that is also a way that they have learned to assert themselves. They've learned, oh, this is the way you tell others who's boss.
Right.
And when it comes to neglect, then as Dr. Saab just pointed out, that has ramifications in terms of their medical well-being or their basic health.
Of course.
Poor girl doesn't get enough food to supply to the baby.
Right.
So it is not just what she's consuming, it's more important what she's not consuming.
Right. So, of course, there are two ways to look at it. But, madam, when we talk about short-term impacts, I think it's also very important to talk about the family of the child who has been abused. So, how do you see the ramifications of child abuse impacting the family at large?
Well, the issue with the family is that initially there is unfortunately denial because there's a lot of stigma associated with, you know, the idea of abuse. And the hardest issue part of the problem is this, that unfortunately the person who's committing the abuse is a family member. So more often it's a family member than a stranger.
Right.
So sometimes parents or extended family have a hard time accepting this is something that is going on.
Right, madam, your point is noted. On which, madam, I'll come to you. I think it's very important for us to talk about the mandate of NCRC, which stands for the National Commission on the Rights of Child, so to speak. Now, we understand the fact that when we talk about, of course, the mandate of this commission, it includes, you know, inquiring into child right violations and also, of course, you know, taking suo motu notices of serious child rights violations. So what exactly does constitute to be serious? Because at the end of the day, this is a very subjective word. What might be serious for one person might not be serious for the other.
Definitely, you know, as we have already mentioned, Dr. Naeem and my other colleagues, that child abuse does not only mean physical harm or physical, you know, abuse which is visible in terms of beating or maybe some scars on your body. It is more harmful when it is neglect or where maybe it is, you know, emotional abuse or mental trauma. So, unfortunately, in our society, this is something which is accepted as a social norm. And I call it a very harmful social norm. And unfortunately, if you take the case of not only the big cities of Pakistan, but all the rural areas where majority of population exists, these social, you know, norms are so powerful. Sometimes they supersede the legal, you know, laws and legal proceedings as well. If you go to any police station, even those people are also influenced by those harmful social norms or practices, and they will not pursue the case. So that's why if we all go back to our childhood, if I go back to my childhood and I think for, you know, few minutes, what was those factors which gave me and kept haunting me for years and years, which left an I must say, continuous scars on my mind, which are not visible. So the answer is very easy. So if people, children particularly, since I have a mandate to deal with the Commission on the Child Rights, so if children have any sorts of, you know, harassment, uneasiness, anything which they feel that they are, you know, pressured from the society, internally they are upset, mentally they are upset, inclusion is an issue in the society, and if they are getting any sort of negative maybe comments from society, they all come under child abuse.
Right, madam. But madam, when it comes to, of course, your work in this regard, and we do know that you've been very actively working on, of course, you know, addressing not one, rather different kinds of child right violations, something which has, of course, hit the headlines as well. That includes, the cases of child domestic labor that you did take up in this regard. So tell us that, you know, over a period of time, as somebody who has been very actively working in the field, what are the trends that you observe? What kind of child right violations are becoming very common now?
Definitely. I think the child sexual abuse, domestic child labor, child exploitation, you know, through commercial exploitation like child laborers or maybe sexual exploitation, even use of social media has become one of the sources to abuse children. And likewise, harassment of children, and then it's kidnapping, it's early marriages, it's forced conversion, it's beating, all sorts of things come under, child abuse, and it is very rampantly happening in society.
Right. And at the end of the day, madam, I think a very important connection which we do need to make is the fact that, at some level or the other, they are related to, of course, the issue of child abuse, be it the issue of child marriage that way, be it the issue of corporal punishment, and so many other issues. Amrit, coming towards you, I think when we talk about, child safety, when we talk about child protection, of course, there are more than one ways to look at it.
Definitely.
But looking at, of course, one angle, child abuse, which is the topic of the day, what laws exist in Pakistan to actually penalize the same?
The foremost law that we have is in our constitution itself, which is Article 25, which talks about how it is very important for a child to be protected and safeguarded against all kinds of odds. Then moreover, with time, due to the rising and increasing rates of violence and abuse in respect to children, we have more and more laws, especially there has been amendments in Pakistan Penal Code after 2016. Then the Zainab alert case in 2019 is being the foremost, after which the abduction of the child, the kidnapping, and then furthermore the death of the child itself.
You've rightly mentioned all these laws, but moving on towards the implementation, do you feel as a lawyer practicing in Pakistan that all these progressive laws, which of course do exist to address various child right violations, are they actually implemented in letter and spirit?
That's the main problem, and that's the crux of it, that we do have lots of laws on paper, but the main thing comes on implementation. But before implementation, I also think that the most important thing is for us to accept that these abuses do exist, and for our families to accept it. There is a cultural taboo on all of us that if somebody says and comes down, for instance, even a child, that they have been sexually abused or emotionally abused or through neglect or lots and various and other ways.
Actually, at the end of the day, I think it's that social and cultural unity that we provide,
Absolutely.
because of which we see that there is ineffective implementation. So of course,
Definitely.
if we aim to improve implementation, then these are the issues that we need to work on. So
Definitely.
coming towards you, I think in this regard we must also of course address this very pertinent issue of child corporal punishment. I think something which the other panelists also mentioned, and child corporal punishment, as we understand, is of course an issue which just doesn't exist in Pakistan. It exists in other parts of the world too. Even in countries like US and Australia, we've seen that it hasn't been declared illegal, so to speak. So when we talk about addressing all these issues which one way or the other directly relate to the issue of child abuse, how precisely can that be done? Because in a society like ours, where perhaps spanking your child is not considered to be something wrong socially, how can you then penalize it? Because for that you need to change the mindset of the society at large.
I think there are many facets to it. Obviously, the mindset has to be changed. Any person who has risen to any position in the country probably has also been beaten as a child. Now, what he says or she says is, I was beaten as a child and I'm all right. That's the mindset which takes you negatively. Because what I feel, and having worked with so many people, if the children, if these were not beaten at childhood, they probably would have performed even better. And especially now when we are talking about the young children, and they are beaten right, left and center, they, again, I'm talking about the hard wiring and the soft wiring of the brain, they take it as granted as a norm.
Right.
So it is very difficult to change that, and it is in all the world, in the developing countries as well. And then there is the how much of the beat the child can take, who is the one who is inflicting it, is the, and the second thing that we must in Pakistan know, that a child is an entity itself.
Of course.
The child is not
So
the
rightly
property
pointed
of
out.
parents.
Right.
So when the parents are beating the child, it's not normal.
I think that narrative, sir, that a child being an object of charity or somebody who's, of course, you're a guardian of that child, especially when the child is a minor. But I think we need to have that acceptance of the fact that the child has rights. They need to be treated in a dignified manner. They have all the rights which adults do, as per the constitution, of course, as per the laws of the country.
When we are talking of the child, we are forgetting the mother. Domestic abuse leads to child corporal punishment.
Right.
The mother gets beaten by the father. And it again boils to the domestic, whatever happening at the home is affecting the child at the end.
Right, sir, your point is noted. I think in this regard, the basic narrative, which of course does need to change, is the fact that, we need to give children the due respect and of course the dignity that they do deserve. Madam, coming towards you, I think a very rampant form of abuse which often is ignored is that of course, online abuse of children. And this is something which has become very rampant, more particularly with the use of social media, so to speak. So as a psychologist, if somebody comes to you or you come across a patient who you suspect possibly could have suffered from any form of cyber harassment or for that matter online bullying, how precisely do you diagnose the same?
Well, for diagnosis you need to understand how the child was before it occurred. So you need to have interviews with the parent in terms to understand what is the personality of the child. Is it a shy child? Is it a active, socially active person? And then you see, are there any differences in behavior? Are there sudden changes? Are there changes in their sleep patterns? Are there changes in who they're comfortable with, who they are not comfortable with? Even in their language, the language they use. Suddenly, if you see young children using words that are inappropriate, you might, that's a red flag. Thinking, where are they picking this up from?
Or for that matter, you see your child using the internet too much, for that matter. And that, of course, there is no check and balance on the kind of interactions that they do have in the digital space.
Absolutely.
But when we talk about it psychologically, like what are the warning signs, like what are the things that parents should look out for in terms of diagnosing, yes, there could possibly be something wrong here?
So, like I said earlier, if there are any changes in the behavior of the child from what was normal for that child, if the child was very social but now suddenly has withdrawn, if the child had friends but now is changing friends,
right.
If the child his or her eating patterns change because there is so much anxiety,
right?
Basically. Their sleeping patterns change.
Of course.
They might not be able to talk about things that they were willing to talk about earlier. Sometimes to pick up on subtle cues, especially with young children, that we will use stories, or we will use puppets to role play, to talk about different scenarios,
right?
To see, okay, how are they responding? What are their responses? Are they typical responses that you would see in a child of that age, or is it something different?
Right. And I think in cases like these, it would be easier to diagnose such abuse, more particularly if it is coming from somebody that the child knows, because there I feel the child feels more stigmatized. They feel very shameful of reporting the same.
Absolutely. And often such cases are kept like a secret.
Right.
The abuser always says, this is our secret.
Right. Right.
So it's hard for the child to open up.
Right, madam, your point is noted. Madam Afsha, coming towards you, I think we must also, of course, talk about the right, of course, to ensure that children have access to information. Now, I understand that this again is something which NCRC is working upon. But when we talk about, of course, ensuring that children have, of course, access to information, it's equally important that we ensure that they have access to appropriate information. So how particularly is that balance struck?
Definitely, children do have a right to have access to information, and in our society, this is something imbalanced, I must say, because what is happening around us as our social practices, our norms, or maybe the parenting style or the education institutes are doing, it's the other way around. What they need to know, they don't know, and what they should not know, they know. So we have to reverse this balance in our society. For example, it is very appropriate and right that children having, access to information which is very important for them. For example, to have self-protection, to have a sense of right and wrong, to have life skills, and to have, ethics, character building. This is something which is not part of our overall curriculum or school education. There used to be times in the past when these were part of the education system, but now they have been just replaced by mere life skills only, and that too are very much anecdotal. But if we see and compare our educational system, our parenting with the best, you see, there is much more difference between the two societies, and that's why our children, even if they are 17, 18, they are still not mature. They don't even know what action is right, what action is wrong, and they don't have even a a clarity of any direction. So I must say that this is something very important. Even the concerned stakeholders, particularly parents and educational institutes, teachers even don't know what do we mean by this clause, even which is one of the very important clauses in our convention, the rights of child, that having access to information is the right of children.
As to increase the minimum age of marriage for girls to 18, and also in this regard to ensure the provision of CNIC, especially at the time of signing the marriage contract, which is the Nikah Nama. But moving away from, lobbying for this cause, practically what all have you been successful in achieving?
Thank you very much, Fatima, for putting a very pertinent question. In fact, child marriage is these days talk of the town, and every stakeholder is trying to address this issue. But if you actually ask me what we are doing or where we are heading, I don't have any answer. And we cannot be successful, for addressing this issue until and unless all the stakeholders, including the parliamentarians, the religious segment, the judiciary, the legal fraternity, and the parents and society at large is at one page. Currently, in Pakistan, Sindh is the only province where we have this age of child marriage 18. The rest of the provinces have 16 for girls and 18 for boys, and still every province is trying to make this issue of child marriage in terms of both same age for both for the boys and the girls. There are lots of practical gaps in the implementation mechanism of the laws.
Right, madam, your point is noted. We do need to work on improving the implementation of child marriage laws as they do exist in Pakistan, on which I'll come to you. Your narrative and of course input in this regard becomes very important, being the only lawyer on the show today. So what proposals would you make that, if we were to of course improve implementation of these laws so as to, address the issue of child marriage and related abuse, whatever that may be, what are the issues that we need to tackle, both at of course at a judicial level and of course at a police level?
I think the foremost being that we need to educate the policemen, the parents, and every institution that is linked in respect to the child's perspective. It could be there, especially the foremost being the parents, and then the school in itself. The nurturing that is being done via these two institutions should be in such a way that they are actually making the child equipped to know that these are their rights, and if they're violated, what steps they should take. And for that matter, once they are educated, the people and the safeguards and the people and the institutions who need to safeguard the interest of these children, they need to be educated on these.
Right, Barrister Sahiba, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, madam. And moving towards the conclusion of the show, I think we must of course also talk about the very pivotal role of media. And in this regard, we understand the fact that NCRC has been very actively working not only with PEMRA so as to raise awareness on various child right issues, but also has engaged a very known actor who is actually endorsing all their child right campaigns. So practically tell us that what breakthrough has been made and how successful have all these mass media campaigns actually been in bringing about a difference in practice.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Let me just tell you that overall, if we talk about issue of abuse across the country, I believe that prevention is the bestest of the best strategy to avoid it, and for that media can play a very, very effective role, and it's not only media but all the relevant stakeholders. And NCRC being a very new commission, just 2.5 years old, and initially it started, working on establishment of its own secretariat. So keeping in view lots of challenging ahead and lots of, responsibilities, and just making use of that 3 years tenure, what we, thought that we should have a goodwill ambassador who is very much accepted, who is known, who is already sensitized, who has already worked on the, issue. So we selected Ehsan Khan as one of the goodwill ambassadors. Side by side, we also approached PEMRA and started working in collaboration so that whatever video clips, whatever messages, whatever material we prepare, they should be, just writing to all the concerned TV channels to display it to telecast it for free. After that, the benefit which NCRC has, I must say, just seen that he not only appeared on various TV channels talking about various abuses, that he had been going different places in person as also and speaking on the issues of child abuse. The other benefit was that PEMRA, which is an institution which can play a much more critical role, they also helped us having or telecasting all our video clips and messages for free. And there was around 52-page report which they shared with us later on. If we equate it with money, it becomes in millions all that amount which otherwise we would have to spend. And the third aspect is which NCRC, by setting this example, contributed towards the systemic change. And that was that when we were part of the bringing amendment into Sindh Child Protection Authority Act, and just following our example of engaging PEMRA and their role, which can be very, fruitful, beneficial for awareness raising, they put this role of PEMRA in the law that they should be, as one of the stakeholders to keep it on ongoing basis. So I think this is something which NCRC has been instrumental not only to roll out its own mandate, but to highlight the issue of child abuse across marriage. And then we also held numbers of, I can't tell you, but it has been in dozens and dozens and dozens of radio programs, because radio is one such medium which is heard all over the country.
And Madam, this is definitely a momentum that we've seen that you've been working on during the COVID-19 pandemic as well. And I also remember you mentioning that, you've also been working to address various kind of child right violations.
Yeah. Let me just tell you the third thing that, the basic, role of NCRC was to engage with the parliamentarians, to go and speak with various, concerned parliamentary committees, of Senate, National Assembly, provincial, concerned ministers and departments. And the benefit of all that is you can see that recently our Child Rights Caucus has been established at the National Assembly, and we are going to present NCRC walks in that Child Rights Parliamentary Caucus. This is a big breakthrough.
My last question to you would be that, in this regard, then of course, and there's no denying to the fact that whenever we talk about, of course, working towards prevention of child abuse in whatever form it may so exist, it's extremely important that all the relevant stakeholders, whoever they may be, they all need to be on one page. And they not only that, they also need to have a very coordinated response in this regard.
Let me just tell you something which is, I really put it before Justice Babar Sattar. I went in person and spoke before the court. What is missing at the moment at the federal and provincial level, that is a redress and referral mechanism. All these stakeholders are working good, but working in silos. What we need to do is to have one strong platform where they converge their efforts. There is need to have a coordination communication mechanism so that any child who is a victim of abuse, in conflict with law, or there's any issue of its custody, any surface that a child, he or she, or maybe any, in terms of, transgender child needs it, they should be provided that service, and that is only possible when it is the law enforcement agencies, police, Human Ministry of Human Rights, Social Welfare Departments, Education, Labor, Interior, they all need to be at one page, and they should be providing and complementing all these services. For example, because police can do up till a certain limit. They have to now then dependent on the Social Welfare Department, where the Social Welfare Department has to provide support for rehabilitation, maybe shelter and other services to the children. So these type of coordination, referral mechanism is a big missing, I must say, intervention at the national and provincial level. Something needs to be done on this.
Right, Madam, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Amrit. But I think in this regard, we must also, of course, talk about the rights of that strata of the Pakistani society, more particularly of children, which are, very conveniently ignored. And, here I'm referring to the rights of, migrant children, rights of refugee children. And in this regard, of course, children who are child beggars, so to speak. Could you tell us that, what laws exist so as to protect the rights of these vulnerable segments of the society?
Pakistan has signed a ratified treaty with United Convention of Human Rights on children especially, and Article 22 specifically states that any country who has ratified this treaty is supposed to safeguard and protect these children. They're supposed to be rehabilitation centers. There are supposed to be lots of things that are to be provided by the state, and the state mechanisms have to play an active role in respect to these children and their protection, which comes down to these centers, their training, the police in respect to this, that what roles they should be taking in respect to them, and especially because these are the migrant children, they are already very vulnerable to all of the external forces that they have been through, especially the street beggars, because they are the one really who we are talking about.
Right.
So I believe that we do have laws in per se, but then it all comes down to the active role of institutional organizations that should be
institutional strengthening is something here that
Yes.
we need to work on if we of course aspire to improve implementation.
Yes.
Sir, coming towards you and to conclude today's show, I think we must talk about prevention, because as they very rightly say that prevention is better than cure. So if you were to strategize both in terms of policy as well as of course in terms of institutional strengthening, what would your recommendations be, that what are the areas that we need to work on and how precisely can we of course aim to prevent child abuse as it does exist in the Pakistani society?
Thank you, Fatma. A very pertinent question, because prevention costs less, probably 100 times less. Our thrust has always been on managing once the abuse has occurred.
Right.
So it's not proactive. So it's reactive approach which doesn't lead us anywhere. When we are talking about proactivity, then we are talking about the adolescent girl. We are talking about her protection. We are talking about her nutrition. Then the moment she becomes, she conceives after marriage and she is conceiving a child, her nutrition, her place in the house, no violence at that time, and her mental state at that time. Pakistan has more than 30% undernourished children born, which means the children who are born at birth, less than 2.5 kg, they are 30%. And would you believe 1 in 25 children die during the first month of life, whereas in the West, probably 6 out of 1,000 probably would die. So we need to work at that stage.
Right.
Then the next 6 months, when the brain is actually forming. So why I talk about the first 1,000 days, we are working on those specifically on the first 1,000 days, which is 9 months before the birth of the child, and then 2 years after that.
And sir, you're also going out to the rural areas of the country, which is extremely important,
it
because
has to
these are
be.
those areas, which need us the most.
So probably where we are reaching is those areas which do not have any medical help, at least 4 to 6 kilometers.
Right.
So we are in 12 districts of Punjab already, including the Dera Ghazi Khan and Rajanpur, which are flood affected, and we have found a lot of child abuse cases and
Right.
child protection issues over there. So what we need to really establish is the mindset
Right.
that instead of giving money at the end when a person is dying, it is better to save them through
course.
pennies, and we can do that.
Right, sir, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, madam. I think in this regard, we must of course, talk about the very important role and the responsibility which then lies on mental health care professionals like yourself. So in this regard, what kind of, obligations should be put on, professionals like yourself, so that, they report these cases? Because until and unless these cases are reported, we can't, expect people who are aggrieved to actually get justice, or for that matter, timely treatment too.
As Dr. Saab correctly pointed out, there has to be, first of all, the laws in place. So the person who's reporting is safeguarded. Number two, there needs to be a system of care where there is not just the psychologist, but the school and the parent and the state who are all involved in the protection of the child. And as you were pointing out earlier about, if let's say we want to get schools on board and we want to talk about teacher awareness. You see, teachers are very much a part of the same society. They have the
Right.
same attitudes, they carry the same taboos, they carry the same thought processes. So I think we need to start from awareness.
Right, madam, your point is noted, on which I'll come to you, Amrit. And of course, being the youngest on the panel today, I think your input on this is extremely important. So when we talk about, of course, young people playing their respective role, especially when it comes to fighting off or combating child abuse, what role can they particularly play, more, specifically using the power of social media?
It's actually a very nice question, but I'm going to answer it step by step. So first of all, I really believe that in our institutions, as students and as peers of my age, we need to stop stigmatizing it as if it's a big taboo. And we need to start accepting it that if a child is facing such and such, they should at least talk among the peers, and there should be somebody that they can talk to about it. And rather than just bullying them that they face something and then sidelining them and putting them on one edge, that's not going to be how it's going to be. The problem is not going to be met.
Your point is noted, on which note I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much everyone for joining us here today. Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about child abuse and child maltreatment as it does exist in the Pakistani society, whereas of course we do need to actively work on improving the implementation of laws and of course the policies which are in place so as to address this very issue. What is equally important is that we invest in prevention of course, coping strategies which aim to actually do away with child abuse. And in this regard, it's not only important that we actually ensure that all the relevant stakeholders, they are on one page. What is equally important is that we ensure that children have that right access to information. We need to educate our children, we need to sensitize our children, we need to ensure the fact that they understand what's good for them and what's not good for them, because at the end of the day, knowledge is power. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.